Okay, we're going to review some of your options for quilting. One of the most common methods of quilting is referred to as stitch in the ditch, because you're going to be stitching right along this edge of your quilting, and you're basically stitching in the ditch. Some machines have a foot available that has this little blade in the center, so that when you're stitching, it's actually opening up that slightly so that you are able to stitch more accurately into the ditch. I find very often with this that I have to move my needle position to the right or the left one notch depending on which side I'm stitching on. Another option, instead of just, you can see from the back that it's just, you end up with a straight line. Another option is to use some sort of a fancy stitch. There's all kinds of stitches available in most machines, so you can use that instead of the straight stitching in the ditch. Another option is to have a straight line sewing with parallel lines that correspond with it. You're going to start out with one line, whether it's this one is set at 45 degrees, but you have options on your rulers of doing a 60-degree angle. This one's a 30-degree angle, so instead of having just squares, you can end up having slight diamond shapes. Once your first line is established, there's this wonderful quilt guide that goes into the back of the shank of your foot. So you're going to set that to whatever distance you want, and then the next line you're going to use this guide to follow that first line, and then keep on sewing. And then of course your perpendicular lines are going to be established, whether you want to have them square. And if you want to see what it's going to look like, just lay a piece of thread across the lines that you have, and there's your squares. Or instead of making your cross line square, you can put it at a bit of an angle so that they end up being a slight diamond shape. So that's another option that's available as well. Instead of doing straight lines, you can do whatever shape of a line that you want. I just used the back side of my paper piecing ruler to create this wave, and then traced it onto my quilt, and I have matching mark points, so that when I have to keep drawing it, I'm going to be able to keep matching them up to keep it going. And again, once you've got your first line established, you will use your quilt guide to follow that line to get your next line sewn. And again, well, you could actually, instead of doing them even like this, you could offset it so that eventually you end up with a slightly different wavy pattern. And again, instead of doing it exactly 45 degrees on each other, do it at a bit of an angle. But you know what, you can just take that and draw that out on a piece of paper to see how the angles work out and what pattern you want to follow. Another option is hand quilting. There are all kinds of stencils that are available on the market, and so you can put in whatever shape that you want. And in this case, I have this wonderful leafy pattern, and what I'm using is my little chalk marker it's a rolling chalk marker to draw in all the lines, and then I will continue quilting by hand. And so this is also an option, and now I have all the chalk marks on there that I can continue stitching by hand. Another option is free motion, where you have basically these squiggles or any shape of pattern of stitching that you want. Not all machines are able have the capability of doing free motion, because first of all, what happens is that the machine you will drop the feed dogs, but most importantly, instead of having your regular foot to create the pressure as you're sewing, there's a specialized foot which virtually bounces with every stitch, and that's how it applies pressure to continue to hold pressure on the fabric as each stitch is happening. And because the feed dogs are dropped, the machine doesn't have the feed dogs to pull the fabric through, so what's happening is that the needle is still going up and down the way it normally does, but you are the one who is controlling the fabric under the needle. But again, a lot of machines don't have that capability. Another option for a foot, this one comes with the Husqvarna or the Pfaff. Another option is to use this. This is one of the embroidery feet, and this also bounces up and down as it's stitching. So free motion may be an option for you if your machine has the capability. I've used a number of different stitches to quilt this, and you can see on the 9 patch I've just used a diagonal stitch across each one, and a serpentine stitch along the sashing, and this is almost like almost a brick stitch or railroad stitch on the rail fence. And on the Irish chain, this is just stitching the ditch around each of the individual blocks and down to the log cabin. There's a little diamond pattern used for the quilting, and an embroidered motif in the center, and I guess it's like a feather stitch for the paper piecing, and a meander stitch on the this is free motion, meander stitch on the drunkard's path, and a very large X pattern on the flying geese, and this is just a plain stitch in the ditch. And even on for the binding I used a large feather stitch. Looking at the back of the quilt, you can see the different effects of the various stitching that was used. That was the rail fence, and this was over the 9 patch. This was over the pinwheel, and this is in the center of the Ohio Star. This is the log cabin. Now you can really see the motif that was put in there, and the meander stitch around the drunkard's path, and I used a very large diamond double stitch on the edges of the border.